I'm Mark Himelstein. I'm the CTO for RISC-V. I talked a little bit yesterday. Some of you were there. You're going to see some similar slides, but you're going to see some more detail here. We'll just get moving here. So we're going to talk a little bit about open standards. We're going to go through the roadmap, a little bit about portability, the ecosystem, Runway, and opportunity. So, what are we? And things changed over the last, year. We really changed the messaging. Instead of being called open source and free, we're really an open standard. So we're a lot more like Ethernet than we are like Linux, okay? And it may seem like a subtle difference to you, but it really is different. When we go ahead and our members go ahead and sell to their customers, there's a lot more added value because they're going ahead and doing implementations and stuff like that. We don't do reference implementations. That's being done by the members, and sometimes it's partner organizations like Open Hardware or Chips Alliance or Low Risk, other free venues. But it's really very different. However, we do work with open source standards, open source projects all the time. That's probably 2/3 of what we do. You'll see 2/3 of what we do is software. And that's really critical that we work with open source. We're friendly with open source, but we're not open source. And then finally, the two things that we do that's in our GitHub that we own, we have some other things in GitHub we host as a favor, but the two things we do are the golden model. So Bill McSpadden is here. Hello, Bill. Bill's driving the sale effort from RISC-V staff perspective. And the golden model is intended over time to be the definitive spec for instructions, and we're working on having it coordinate with the spec and be able to move sale back and forth and so on and so forth into the spec. And so you'll see that evolve over the next year. And then we also do the architectural tests. We call them compatibility tests. The people running that group had a hard time calling them compliance. They're not elaborate alarm systems. They're more of like lock the front door kind of thing. That, along with other testing that each implementer does, allows you to go ahead and brand as RISC-V compatible. So, unlike open source, just to be really clear, we really encourage custom extensions. I mean, that's where innovation happens. That's the difference about RISC-V. You can do whatever you want. We talked to one member today who does, sort of 99% standard, and they have like 4 or 5 instructions that they add that they need for their solution, and it's great, and we support it. Eventually, they're talking about bringing that in as a proposal to be a standard, but today, they're going ahead and doing that by themselves. We don't have copy left, right? Because we don't have code, right? It's all specifications. So copyleft is kind of a non sequitur in our world, and the only restrictions are about branding, which I talked about already. So we're going to talk about the roadmap differently than last year. Last year, I put up a roadmap that was timeline-based, and everybody said, we can't figure this out. Help us out a little bit. So we grouped it by these attributes, and these attributes are, kind of representative of what we do. So extensible, we really care about developers, integrated really with the software that runs the systems, unified, a lot of talk about unification and profiles this year. Chris is here. Chris is going to talk about profiles later. And then the RISC-V security model and what's going on in security is just astonishing. So adaptable, this is, RISC-V is evolving. There are some gaps that we have compared to other architectures. We're working on closing those gaps. If you don't like something we're doing or you think we should be doing something we're not doing, get involved. We're a continuous improvement organization. We welcome involvement. We built a scalable organization so that we can push down the power to those groups, to the committees, to the task groups, to add to RISC-V and drive it forward. You can see there's 70 extensions to date, but probably by the end of the first quarter, there'll probably be close to 100. And there's 9 committees, 28 special interest groups, and 26 task groups. I'm told that these numbers are low, and we just didn't have time to really count everybody and get everything absolutely correct. But it's an amazing group of people. So it means that the leaders of these, there's a vice chair and a chair of every group. You're talking about probably somewhere between 100 and 150 people. Some people do multiple groups. And there are really custom extensions out there in the world. There's a V7 version of Vector. Ventana has conditional ops that, again, now are coming forward, wanting to be a standardized extension. And, we don't come with the baggage of history. We stand on the shoulders of the great architectures before us, and we got to take advantage of that and do something that was clean and good. And I think this is like small print here, but this is efficient. I mean, we have a modular ISA. You can pick and choose the pieces you want. It's intended so that people can create really, really great performant parts or low power parts. It's your choice what you do. That ultimate freedom is what's really attracting a lot of people. We have a company called Bluetrum in China who's shipping over 600 million RISC-V cores a year in earbuds. They don't participate with our groups. They don't care. They're using the base instructions. They have their own SoC stuff, and they pull it off. It's great. Espressif and TE-Link doing things, for home automation SoCs. And Espressif told me I was blown away. They're talking about open sourcing their implementation. So it's all very exciting stuff. But the reason why we get people who are doing tightly embedded stuff all the way up to HPC, so we have Barcelona Supercomputer, we have Alibaba Cloud, we have a lot of people doing big things, is because of that flexibility. So tomorrow, what's coming? So we have a 16 register implementation that people have been using for a while. We never dotted the I's and crossed the T's on it. That's coming. All the profiles, which I'm not going to go into because Chris is going to talk about it. I'll show you a little bit of stuff later on. And then a bunch of extensions, the biggest of which is Crypto Vector, which we're hoping in Q1 or Q2 gets ratified. It's a lot of work. They basically had a fairly good idea about the implementation. They wanted to wait till Vector is done, and it still has taken them over a year. It's hard work. They're doing the hard work to get this right. ZC is more compressed instructions, and then there's a whole bunch of subsets that are coming in. And then there's a whole bunch of non-ISA stuff. So for the first time this year, 4 of the 6 extensions that have gotten ratified, there's going to be a 7th ratified hopefully on Thursday, but 4 of the 6 are non-ISA extensions. And so there's big work going on in things like AppTE and IOMMU. So there's just tons of work going on. 2/3 of the work in the task groups is about software, okay? It's about the software ecosystem. And you're going to see that repeated throughout the talk. And we're very developer-centric. We have a very elaborate set of groups, both inside of RISC-V and outside of RISC-V, that are working on RISC-V related things. So there's an LLVM group that meets, there's a GCC group that meets. They're run under the auspices of those projects. But we have a fairly active toolchain SIG that's driving a bunch of this stuff. And you can see these are all the tools that fall under the category of compilers, runtimes, build tools, et cetera, that already work on RISC-V. Great work by Raphael. Raphael, are you in the room? He's in a different room. He put together a spreadsheet with what actually is there. And I'll tell you, I got challenged because I didn't actually know a bunch of these names. And this is the difference about software in today's world, there's 1,000 apps out there. I have 5 minutes left? I have 10, okay. There's an amazing amount of software out there. The reason we're a community is because we share this work. That's why we do it. No other reason. We get to share the ecosystem. That's why we do it. And the ecosystem obviously depends on an ISA and profiles and everything else. But sharing this burden is really important. What's coming next is profile support in the compilers, a whole bunch of performance analysis and modeling, sort of next generation of some of the tools and some of the other pieces. So integrated is around operating systems. Again, you can see a huge amount of work both in the interfaces like UEFI and SBI, as well as having the operating systems actually work for RISC-V. Is the work done? No. I mean, there's always more tuning and other things to get working. But there's more stuff on the horizon. And one of the things I want to point out is the embedded RVM CSI. We're talking about putting together sort of a library layer of it says Common Service Interface for embedded. Once that's in place, we'll go back and revisit profile for embedded as well for microcontroller level. So unified. So look, the big things that are going on are number one, profiles, and you're going to hear about that. And number two, SEEI, and you're going to hear about that. SEEI stands for Supervisor Execution Environment. That's right from the specs. It specifies an environment in which the ISA runs. And so think of this as the interface between OS/hypervisor and everything underneath. Call it firmware, call it BIOS, call it whatever you want to call it. But that interface has to be really well defined. The SBI is a standard Linux thing, and there's common things there, and that's been ratified already. But there's always more. But profiles is another interface. But there's a whole bunch. And if you go to Aaron's talk this afternoon, you'll hear, or later this morning, you'll hear about the details of the SEEI. This picture here is just a little snippet of a spreadsheet that I put together. Krista wrote the profile spec along with Greg and Andrew and Earl and John Hauser. And this is just a summary just to show you, for example, that D is floating point. It was ratified in 2019, and it's mandatory in RVI 20, RVA 20, and RVA 22. So this is available for people to have a quick snapshot to see everything in one place. Secure, this is going crazy. There's so much stuff that's going on here. Crypto vectors coming, runtime integrity. All these task groups have started. Trusted computing. There's a whole bunch of priv stuff. We started a Cherry SIG, so those of you familiar with Cherry, it's kind of like a whole different thing, and we're starting to talk about how that fits into RISC-V, and then microarchitecture side channel attacks, and then there's a bunch of public libraries. There's a bunch that's already there and supported out in the wild. So that's really it for the roadmap. I just want to say some words about portability. The reason we do profiles, one of the major reasons we do profiles and platforms is so that we can, compile an application for one implementation and move it to another. And except for things like, performance or timing kind of things, it should work basically the same. You need both the profile and some kind of API like POSIX. Eventually, you want to be able to move operating systems as well and just reconfigure them on installation. But again, the important thing here is that we need a set of interfaces that we all agree to. We need a profile that's in place. This is the SEEI kind of overview picture where you can see the interface between the operating system and the stuff below. My portable mouse did not work, so software ecosystem is really our number one priority. We have to get this in place. It is the concern of every single member. Even though we've done all this work, there's always more to do. And so you're going to see a sort of, I would say, a revitalized and increased effort this year to fill some of the gaps in the software ecosystem. And this is a slide that yesterday didn't render, so anybody who was in the meeting, these came out as blanks because I was using my boss's laptop. It's a PC, what can I say? Believe it or not, all this stuff is there. It's just amazing. And the stack is pretty understandable. You've seen it 100 times before. Again, the things we do are SAIL and the architecture tests and the specs. There's a whole bunch of tools. And there's also services that are not represented here. And then implementations we don't do, but we work to enable them in other open organizations. Just a quick word about Runway. Look, once we finish the spec, it takes time to get into real hardware. We can get into QEMU a lot quicker, sometimes RTL simulation, but we have to understand how many chips, Krista, do you know how many chips implement H today in the world? Yeah, so no silicon shipping with H yet. Hopefully in the first half of the year there will be, but H was ratified in November of 2021. So just understand that there's a runway here, and it's important to understand you have to have patience and understand that the minute it gets ratified doesn't mean you're going to see product with it in hardware. And finally, this is the same message I gave yesterday. Look, we're collaborating, but we're also competing. We have to figure out how to make that work. Whatever we do now, that's what's going to make a difference for the next 10 years inside of RISC-V. So my plea is let's stand together and make this successful. And if you haven't joined RISC-V, do it. If you haven't joined the groups, feel free to do it. You can always send mail to help@risc5.org to figure out where to go. And that's all I have. So are there any questions?
I'm the guy that's going to run around with the microphone. So I didn't see anything online. If you're online and have a question, please ask. If you're in the room, raise your hand, wave at me, reach for the mic. Questions for Mark? Here we go, Mark.
So there's a lot of ratified specs. Do you have a place where people can kind of track what's coming and where it's going?
Absolutely. Does everybody know how to get to risc5.org? Pretty easy.
The wiki on RISC-V.
If you go underneath there and you go under technical, there's a thing that says Tech Wiki, and that has a bunch of useful links. And one of the links is specification status. All the specs that are in flight, all the specs that have been ratified. So you can see both ISA and non-ISA specs. So I want to ask a question. If you guys don't have another question. Oh, you want to? Go ahead. Yeah, ask.
You waved. You didn't. You got through.
So on one of your last slides, you had something about you need to follow architecture test polish or something to use the branding. How effective do you think that's being? Because for some extensions, there's pre-1.0 hardware out there, and it's a bit awkward.
Yeah, it's not been effective. And I think part of the reason it's not been effective is that profiles aren't in place. But part of it is I don't think there's been general interest by the community because most of the stuff, again, that's been shipped out is embedded, and they're not running general purpose computing, and they're not, in a lot of cases like Blue Trump, are not branding as RISC-V. So you got to be care about branding in order to do that. And I think as bigger systems come out, that's going to help. But I'm supposed to have a meeting with our director of marketing at the beginning of the year and try to figure out whether people really want this or not. So we try to go ahead and Alan Baum is here, who runs the architectural compatibility test meeting, and Bill runs the sales stuff. We've all are quite aware that nobody has actually branded with this. Nobody has done the compatibility test. Look, we try to work on the things that you guys care about, but sometimes when we put it out, sometimes it's not in a useful form, or people really decide that they aren't interested. So we're going to have to revisit this one at the beginning of the year. But good question. But
One
I
more
wanna-
question for Mark. We have
Yeah.
about
You have another
1
question?
minute left.
While he's going there, I want to ask a quick question. Raise your hands and be honest. Is this talk useful? Should we do this talk again next year? Great, thank you.
Last question.
Last one, oh boy. No pressure at all.
By the way, just so everybody know, Ken is my daughter's godfather, so, you know, just to
Bless you, my son.
Yeah.
No, the question I have is about the competitive landscape. You know, RISC-V is a consortium of, and there's competitor, ARM, I would imagine. What does that look like? How large a share do you guys have as compared to the ARMs and other competitors of the world? And what does that competitive landscape look like?
So it's a much better question for the director of marketing than for me. I will tell you that we don't require people report their volume. But for example, this morning, you know, the director of marketing for product management for Qualcomm got up and said they've silently shipped 650 million cores already. I think the belief is that, you know, over time it's going to increase. But, you know, I think that you know, probably in 3 or 4 years will be, you know, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the market share. And I think still very heavily weighted towards embedded IoT, the industrial controls, device controls. NVIDIA ships like 10 RISC-V cores for every video card. They've told us they've now probably shipped 1 billion RISC-V cores. So it's going out there, and it's really great that it's going out there because the more chips that are out there, that means there's software running on it, and the ecosystem is going to be even healthier. But I actually don't have numbers, and that's part of what we do. We don't require people to provide us numbers, so it's really hard to say. I think it's exciting. I mean, you see, you know, join the board this year, Google, Imagination, Intel, you know, et cetera. I mean, it's just, you know, big folks, small folks. There's great startups, Sci-Fi, Ventana, Revos, you know, leading the pack of leadership within our organization. So just very exciting.
All right, Mark, we need to call time.
Hey, thank you all very much for coming. And please also give a hand for the RISC-V staff like Jeff and Bill because they don't really get applaud very much. So thank you.